No. So, on page 379 today, it says there that we are going to talk about something called a function. Actually, you sort of already know what a function is. You know, we have been working on y equals, stuff like that. Remember when we started the chapter and we wanted to know if, for instance, is 2, 3 a solution? What did you do if you wanted to know if 2, 3 was a solution? Yeah, you plugged it in. You plugged in 2 for x and you plugged in 3 for y, right? So, and then we also graphed those, remember when we graphed? Well, today, a function is basically this same equation, except we write it just a little bit different. Instead of y equals, this is a function of x. In other words, this value that you get depends on what x is. It's a function of x. So for instance, if I asked you to find f of 3, how would you find f of 3? How would you find what is f of 3? Look up here. Wherever you see an x, you're going to replace it with a 3. Wherever you see an x, you would replace it with a 3. So look over here. I see an x. What am I going to replace it with? A 3. So what is f of 3? It's 6 plus 1. What is f of 3? 7, right? So when it says f of 3, find f of 3. F of 3 is 7. We found that, right? What if I ask you to find f of 0? Well, I like to write down my f function again. And what am I looking for? F of 0. I like to write it underneath like that so that I can say, oh, wherever I see an x, now I'm going to replace it with 0. So you go over here, oh, I see an x. What am I going to replace x with? Now 0. And then you'll work it out, right? Mm-hmm. So what do you get? 0, right. So 0 plus 1 is 1. And that's why they call it a function. It's a function of x. What you get over here depends on what you put in for x. What you get over here depends on what you put in for x. Does that make sense? So, do you have questions so far? Part of what they ask you, they give you something called the domain. And they say the domain equals 0, 1, and 2. And they ask you to find the range. What the heck does that mean? Domain, range. Hate it when they use those words. Yes?
Is the range from the biggest number to the lowest number?
Oh, very good. Well, here's what it means here's what range and domain mean. The domain, these are the values that you're going to plug in for x. So when they give you the domain is 0, 1, and 2, they're telling you they want you to plug in x is 0, x is 1, and x is 2. When they give you the domain, those are the values that they're going to ask you to plug in. The range, can anybody guess? The range are the values of f of x. What do you get when you plug those in? So we're going to start with 0, and we're going to find f of 0, which I just erased that one. Wherever we see an x, we're going to put a 0. What do you get? 0 plus 1? So when we plug in 0, what do we get for our answer?
1.
1. This is the first value in our range. Now guess what we're going to do? Plug in 1. So now we're going to find f of 1. Oopsie. What do you get here? 2 plus 1? 3? So if you plug in x is 1, what do you get? 3. That'll be the next value in our range. And guess what we're going to do last? We're going to plug in 2. X is 2. So wherever you see an x, you're going to put a 2. What do you get for that? 4 plus 1? 5. So the values in our range, 1, 3, 5. The domain, those are the values you're going to plug in for x. The range, those are the values that you get out when you plug those other values in. Does that make sense? Does that make sense? And, well, first, do you have questions? Do you have questions? Do you have questions? Anybody have questions?
Fairly easy.
It is, not too bad, right? And one other thing though, over here, I use f of x because it's a function, f. It doesn't have to be an f. It could be a g, like this one is g of x. If I ask you to find g of -2, if you're going to find g of -2, wherever you see an x, you're going to replace it with -2. So what does that give us? -8 minus 2? Is that right?
Mm-hmm.
-10? So g of -2 is. So it doesn't necessarily have to be an f. It could be a g. It could be an h of x. It could be any letter out there that you want. Another thing, there's another way to write. I don't like it. I don't like it. You know how over there we had f of x equals 2x plus 1? There's another way to write it, and I hate it. It's this. F of x equals 2x plus 1. See this? Instead of parentheses, they use a colon. Instead of equals, they use an arrow. I don't like it. So you know what I do? If they write it like this in the book, I automatically just rewrite it like this when I'm working on my paper. I don't like this. It doesn't make sense to me. I like this notation better. So the colon takes the place of the parentheses. The arrow takes the place of the equals. If you like this one and you want to work with this one, feel free. If you'd rather just rewrite it with parentheses and equals, you can do that too. I don't care which one you use. It's up to you. But I don't like this one personally. I just don't. So that's the whole thing today. Easy, right? Yes. Sure. Here, let's do one over here. How about if we find h of -1? Should we find h of -1? And here's my h function. So if I want h of -1, wherever I see an x, what am I going to replace it with? -1. So go to your equation. Here's an x. What am I going to replace it with? -1. So what is h of -1? Multiply this. Is that -5 plus 1? Yes? What is -5 plus 1? -4. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Do you have questions? Are we good? Are we good? We're good? So I'm on 380 and 381. I have WE 1 to 40 all. Yeah.
There's very many different, there's an arrow, some of them have equal
Well,
signs, and the others have arrows.
You know, I don't like the arrow. So if I were doing it and it was an arrow one, here's what I would do. I would, when I write it on my paper, instead of writing it like this, I would just write it like this right off the bat. But you can use the arrow if you like it. I don't like it. Yes.